A billionaire plans to mock his black maid at a gala, but she arrives wearing a dress that once belonged to his late mother, bringing back memories and forcing him to reconsider his attitude. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The Los Angeles skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Constellation Ballroom. Ryan Davis adjusted his custom-made Armani suit as he stood at the entrance, checking his Patek Philippe watch. At 32, he had already amassed a fortune of $4.2 billion through his tech company, DataSphere, and he made sure everyone knew it. The event coordinator rushed forward, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Davis, we're ready for your entrance." Ryan nodded curtly, his expression neutral, but his eyes calculating. He had planned this moment carefully. The lights would dim, the announcer would introduce him, and all eyes would be on him, exactly as he preferred. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host for the evening, the CEO and founder of DataSphere, Mr. Ryan Davis. The spotlight hit him as he descended the grand staircase. 300 of Silicon Valley's most influential figures turned to watch his entrance, their faces illuminated by the crystal chandeliers above. Among the crowd stood Jack Thompson, CEO of Rival Tech, and Sarah Chun, the venture capitalist who had initially rejected Ryan's pitch 5 years ago. Ryan's lips curved into a slight smirk. He had invited them specifically to witness his success, to rub their faces in what they had missed out on. "Ryan, darling," a woman in her 50s air-kissed his cheek. That acquisition of Microtech was brilliant. The stock market certainly thought so. Ryan engaged in the conversation with practiced charm, but his attention kept drifting to his phone, checking the company's latest stock prices. In the kitchen, away from the glamour and champagne, Michelle Brown stood before a small mirror propped against the industrial steel walls. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down the vintage Dior gown she wore, a classic piece in deep burgundy with delicate beading that caught the light. The dress had been hidden away in the mansion's attic, carefully preserved in tissue paper. Michelle had discovered it while cleaning, and something about it had called to her. She knew it was wrong to wear it, but after months of watching Ryan belittle everyone around him, after years of struggling to make ends meet while pursuing her art, she had made a decision. She would wear the dress to the gala. Consequences be damned. 5 minutes until the main course, everyone. The head chef's voice boomed through the kitchen. Michelle's heart raced. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was Ryan's housekeeper, not a guest. But she had managed to get her name added to the service staff list for the evening. And with the dress, she knew she could blend in with the crowd. Back in the main hall, Ryan gathered a small group of tech executives around him. "And then I told the board," he laughed, swirling his champagne, "either they accept the merger, or I'll build a competing product and run them into the ground within a year." The group laughed sycophantically, but Ryan's entertainment was cut short when he spotted Thomas Chun, Sarah's husband, approaching with a determined look. Ryan had specifically planned to embarrass Thomas tonight. He had discovered that Thomas's company was on the verge of bankruptcy, information not yet public. Ryan intended to reveal this during his speech, a calculated move to destroy Thomas's reputation and, by extension, Sarah's judgment. The kitchen staff began to move into position for service, and Michelle took her final look in the mirror. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She didn't know then that it had belonged to Catherine Davis, Ryan's mother, a woman known for her philanthropy and kindness, qualities her aunt had thoroughly rejected after her death. Ryan positioned himself near the stage, preparing for his speech. He had timed everything perfectly. The revelation about Thomas, the announcement of DataSphere's expansion, and a particularly cruel joke about how he had fired his entire janitorial staff and replaced them with automated cleaning robots, a decision that had affected dozens of families, including Michelle's father. The stage was set for Ryan's moment of triumph, but fate had other plans. As the servers began to enter with the first course, and Ryan stepped toward the microphone, he caught a glimpse of something familiar, a burgundy dress that he had last seen 15 years ago at his mother's final charity gala before her death. His hand froze halfway to the microphone as he watched the figure in the dress move through the crowd. And for the first time that evening, Ryan Davis felt his carefully constructed world begin to crack. The burgundy dress moved through the crowd like a ripple in still water. Michelle stepped into the main ballroom with measured grace, her artist's eye taking in every detail of the scene before her. The dress caught the light from the chandeliers, its vintage beading creating subtle patterns on the nearby walls. Several heads turned, not with the dismissive glance usually reserved for the service staff, but with genuine interest. "Who is she?" The whispers began immediately. Michelle heard them, but kept walking, remembering the countless times she had observed these same people while serving their champagne or cleaning their dropped appetizers from the floor. She recognized Sarah Chin's distinctive laugh, the same one she'd heard mockingly discussing the help at previous events. Ryan Davis stood frozen at the microphone, his prepared speech forgotten. The dress triggered memories he'd spent years burying. His mother wearing it at charity galas, bending down to help children from the local shelter, arguing with him about responsibility and privilege. His fingers gripped the microphone stand harder, turning his knuckles white. "Is everything all right, Mr. Davis?" The event coordinator appeared at his elbow, concerned by his unexpected silence. Ryan waved him away, his eyes fixed on Michelle as she navigated through the crowd. She moved differently now, he realized. Gone was the hurried shuffle of his housekeeper. Instead, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that couldn't be bought, the same quiet dignity his mother had possessed. Thomas Chun, momentarily forgotten by Ryan, followed his host's gaze and smiled with genuine appreciation. "Now that's what I call making an entrance," he remarked to his wife Sarah. "Reminds me of the old days, when galas meant something more than corporate showboating." The whispers grew louder as people began to recognize Michelle. Some of the regular guests had seen her serving drinks at previous events. The contrast between their memories and her current appearance created a cognitive dissonance that rippled through the room. A few people pulled out their phones, ready to capture what they assumed would be an impending scandal. "That's Davis's housekeeper," one guest hissed to another. "In Catherine Davis's dress, no less." The nerve of some people. The comment carried across the suddenly quiet room, reaching Michelle's ears. She felt her chest tighten, but kept walking, remembering the days she'd spent studying the dress in secret, learning its history through careful research and conversations with the mansion's older staff members. Ryan finally moved away from the microphone, his planned humiliation of Thomas Chun forgotten. The sight of his mother's dress had knocked something loose in his carefully constructed facade. He started toward Michelle, his expression unreadable, while the crowd parted around him like a dark sea. Michelle saw him approaching and lifted her chin slightly. She had known this confrontation was inevitable, had rehearsed it in her mind countless times while cleaning his mansion's endless rooms. But now, wearing Catherine Davis's dress, she felt something she hadn't expected. A profound connection to a woman she'd never met, but whose presence still lingered in the house's quiet corners. "That dress," Ryan said as he reached her, his voice low enough that only those nearest could hear. "Where did you?" He stopped, recognition flickering across his face. "The attic." He had ordered her to clean it last month, to prepare it for conversion into a home theater. His mother's belongings had still been up there, carefully preserved but forgotten. The crowd waited for Ryan's reaction, anticipating the kind of public humiliation they had seen him deliver to others who had dared to cross him. Several guests had their phones raised, ready to capture the moment. Thomas Chin watched with particular interest, sensing a shift in the evening's power dynamics. Michelle met Ryan's gaze directly. "Your mother wore this dress," she said, her voice clear and steady, "the night she announced the creation of her arts foundation for underprivileged youth." She paused, watching the information hit him like a physical blow. The same foundation that was quietly dissolved after her death. Ryan's carefully planned evening was unraveling. The dress wasn't just a dress. It was a symbol of everything he'd turned his back on, everything he'd tried to bury under acquisitions and stock options. And now his housekeeper stood before him, wearing his mother's legacy like a challenge. The room held its breath, waiting for Ryan's response. But for the first time in years, Ryan Davis, the man who always had a cutting remark ready, found himself speechless. Because in Michelle's eyes, he saw something that shook him to his core. The same unwavering determination he'd last seen in his mother's eyes, the night she had told him that money without purpose was nothing but a weight that would eventually drag him under. The event coordinator hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene. The caterers paused in their duties, sensing the tension. And in that suspended moment, as Ryan stared at the dress that had haunted his memories for 15 years, the carefully constructed walls around his past began to crumble. The silence in the ballroom broke when someone dropped a champagne glass. The shattering sound seemed to snap Ryan out of his trance. Without thinking, he grabbed Michelle's elbow and steered her toward a quiet alcove near the terrace doors, away from the prying eyes and raised phones of his guests. "You had no right," he started, but his voice lacked its usual sharp edge. The familiar scent of his mother's favorite perfume, still clinging faintly to the vintage fabric after all these years, derailed his anger. Michelle stood her ground, neither pulling away nor cowering. "Your mother kept detailed journals," Michelle said quietly. "They were in the attic too, wrapped in the same tissue paper as the dress." She watched his face carefully as she continued. "I read them while cataloging the items you wanted thrown away. She wrote about you every day." Ryan's jaw tightened. "You read my mother's private. She wrote about a boy who used to help her organize art supplies for children's workshops," Michelle interrupted. "A teenager who spent his summers teaching coding to kids from the shelter. What happened to him, Mr. Davis?" The question hit Ryan like a physical blow. Outside, the Los Angeles lights twinkled indifferently, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. He remembered those summers, the pride in his mother's eyes when he'd helped a homeless teenager build their first website, the sense of purpose he'd felt before Silicon Valley's promises of wealth and power had seduced him. "You grew up in Riverside," Ryan said suddenly, surprising himself. He'd read her employment application years ago, but had never bothered to remember the details. "The Arts District." Michelle nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Your mother's foundation funded the community center there. I took my first art classes in that building." She smoothed the dress with careful hands. "I didn't know it was her foundation until I read the journals. By then, the center had been closed for years." The revelation landed heavily between them. Ryan remembered signing the papers to dissolve the foundation, telling himself it was just good business, that art programs didn't generate returns. He'd reinvested the money in tech startups, turning his mother's legacy into profit margins and quarterly reports. "Tell me about your art," he found himself saying, the words emerging before he could stop them. The same words his mother used to say to every aspiring artist she met. Michelle studied him for a moment, perhaps weighing his sincerity. "I work with mixed media," she said finally. "Found objects, primarily. Things people throw away without seeing their value." The pointed comment wasn't lost on Ryan. From the ballroom, they could hear Thomas Chun giving an impromptu speech, likely taking advantage of Ryan's absence to command the room's attention. But for once, Ryan didn't care about the power dynamics at play among his guests. "The piece in the service corridor," he said slowly, remembering something he'd noticed months ago but had dismissed. "The one made from broken mirror fragments and old circuit boards. That's yours?" Michelle's eyes widened slightly, surprised he'd noticed. "Yes, I work on them during my breaks. The mansion has plenty of discarded materials." She paused before adding, "Your mother's journals mentioned that you used to draw, that you had a whole notebook of spacecraft designs." Ryan turned to look out at the city lights, his throat tight. He hadn't thought about that notebook in years. "I wanted to build ships that would take people to the stars," he admitted quietly. Mother said art and science were two sides of the same coin, both about exploring possibilities. She was right, Michelle said. She moved to stand beside him at the window, their reflections overlapping in the glass. "Your company, Datasphere, it could be more than just another tech giant. It could help people explore possibilities." The weight of his mother's dress seemed to fill the space between them with unspoken potential. Ryan looked at Michelle's reflection, really seeing her for the first time. She had his mother's way of cutting through pretense, of seeing what could be rather than what was. "There's a storage room in the East Wing," Ryan said after a long moment. "Behind the library. Mother used it as her personal gallery." He turned to face Michelle directly. "It's been locked since she died. Maybe it's time to open it again." Michelle's expression changed. understanding the significance of what he was offering. "I could help curate it," she said carefully. "Turn it into a space for local artists like she always wanted." The sounds of the gala felt distant now, as if the alcove had become a separate world where past and present, privilege and purpose, began to blur and reshape themselves. Ryan felt something shift inside him, like a key turning in a long rusted lock. "The journal," he said suddenly. "The one where she wrote about me. Could you?" He stopped, struggling with the request. "I'll bring it to you," Michelle promised, understanding what he couldn't ask directly. "Along with the others. She never gave up on you, Mr. Davis. Even at the end." Ryan nodded, unable to speak. Through the ballroom windows, he could see his guests networking, making deals, playing the same power games he'd excelled at for years. But here in this quiet corner, wearing his mother's dress, his housekeeper had somehow managed to open a door he'd thought permanently closed. "We should go back," Michelle said softly. "They'll be wondering where you are." But Ryan knew that returning to the ballroom meant facing a choice: continue being the man he'd become, or start becoming the man his mother had always believed he could be. He looked at Michelle, at the dress that had started this unexpected conversation, and made his decision. As Ryan and Michelle re-entered the ballroom, Thomas Chun was concluding his impromptu speech, his voice carrying across the room with calculated precision. And that's why corporate responsibility isn't just a buzzword, it's a necessity. Something some of our younger tech titans seem to have forgotten. The pointed comment drew a mixture of uncomfortable chuckles and knowing glances. Ryan felt the familiar surge of anger rise in his chest, but Michelle's presence beside him served as an unexpected anchor. She had started to step away, to fade back into the crowd, but Ryan caught her arm gently. "Stay," he said quietly. "Please." The word felt foreign on his tongue. When was the last time he'd said please to any of his employees? Thomas Chin spotted them and made his way over, champagne glass in hand. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ryan, my boy, I was just discussing the importance of giving back to the community. Something your mother understood quite well, as I recall." His gaze settled on Michelle, then the dress, his expression sharpening. Though some might say wearing another's legacy is a bit presumptuous, Ryan felt Michelle stiffen beside him, but before he could respond, Sarah Chun joined her husband. "Oh my," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Isn't that Catherine's dress? The one she wore to the Children's Art Initiative launch?" She turned to the gathering crowd. "I was there that night. Catherine announced a $10 million endowment for arts education. Such a shame how quickly that disappeared after her passing." The accusation hung in the air. Ryan's hands clenched into fists, his prepared speech about Thomas's bankruptcy forgotten. This was a different kind of attack, one that struck at wounds he'd tried to ignore for years. "Actually," Michelle's voice cut through the tension, clear and steady. "Mrs. Davis wore this dress to multiple events. The Art Initiative launch, yes, but also to the Tech Education Summit, where she proposed integrating arts and technology education for underprivileged youth." She looked directly at Sarah. "The program your firm declined to support, if I remember the journals correctly." Sarah's smile faltered. Thomas stepped forward, his own smile hardening. "Journals? My dear, reading your employer's private family documents seems rather inappropriate. Almost as inappropriate as wearing his mother's clothes to an event where you're supposed to be serving drinks." The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the mounting tension. Ryan saw phones being raised again, people eager to capture whatever drama was unfolding. He thought of his mother's journals, of the teenage version of himself teaching coding to shelter kids, of Michelle's artwork hidden in the service corridor. "My mother," Ryan said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, "believed that talent and creativity could be found anywhere. In fact," he paused, looking at Michelle, making a decision that would change everything. "In fact, I'd like to announce that Datasphere is launching a new initiative tonight." Thomas snorted. "Another app for tracking cryptocurrency?" "An arts and technology foundation," Ryan continued, ignoring him. "Starting with a gallery space in the east wing of my home, featuring works by emerging artists from underserved communities." He turned to Michelle. "With a permanent curator who understands both worlds." The reaction was immediate. Whispers erupted throughout the room. Sarah's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Thomas's face darkened with anger and something else. Fear, perhaps, as he realized his attempt to humiliate Ryan had backfired. "How touching," Thomas said, his voice hard. "But let's be honest, Ryan. You dissolved your mother's foundation the moment you got control. Turned it into seed money for Datasphere. Now you expect us to believe you've had some sort of awakening? Because your housekeeper put on a dress? Because my housekeeper reminded me of who I used to be," Ryan corrected him. "And who I should be." He turned to address the crowd directly. "My mother's foundation didn't disappear. It transformed into something else, something worse. I took her dream of helping others and turned it into a machine for helping myself. Tonight, that changes." Thomas laughed, but there was a desperate edge to it. "This is absurd. You can't seriously expect—" "I expect nothing," Ryan interrupted. "But I'm done pretending that success only means profit margins. Done ignoring talent because it comes from the wrong zip code." He looked at Michelle. Done forgetting what really matters. The tension in the room had shifted. Where there had been anticipation of scandal, there was now something else: interest, curiosity, perhaps even respect. Several of the younger tech entrepreneurs were nodding, phones lowered, actually listening. Thomas made one final attempt. "She's manipulating you," he snapped. "Using your mother's memory, too." "My mother's memory?" Ryan stepped forward, his voice dangerous. "You want to talk about my mother's memory? Let's talk about how you tried to block her education initiatives. How you fought against her proposals for integrated STEAM programs. How you—" Ryan. Michelle's hand on his arm stopped him. He looked down, saw his mother's dress, remembered her voice. "Anger is easy, son. Courage is harder." The room waited, breathless, to see what would happen next. In that moment, Ryan Davis had to choose between being the man who would destroy Thomas Chun with revelations about his company's bankruptcy, or the man who would honor his mother's legacy by rising above the pettiness of revenge. The choice, he realized, had already been made the moment he saw Michelle in that dress. Michelle stepped forward, positioning herself between Ryan and Thomas Chun. The burgundy dress caught the light, and for a moment, several older guests gasped. Her stance, her expression, even the way she held her head mirrored Catherine Davis so precisely that it seemed almost supernatural. "Mr. Chun," Michelle said, her voice carrying across the now silent room, "I've cleaned your wine stains from Mr. Davis's carpets enough times to know that your public persona is just that, a persona." She turned to address the crowd directly, years of quiet observation lending weight to her words. "I've watched all of you from the shadows of this house. Serve your drinks, cleared your plates, listened to your deals and your schemes." Thomas attempted to interrupt, but Michelle continued, her voice gaining strength. "You talk about corporate responsibility while your own foundation hasn't awarded a single grant in 3 years. You discuss community involvement from the safety of your penthouses, but when was the last time any of you set foot in the neighborhoods you claim to want to help?" Sarah Chin's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "How dare you?" "I dare because someone has to," Michelle said firmly. Catherine Davis dared. She walked into homeless shelters in this same dress, sat on the floor with children, taught them to paint, to dream, to believe in themselves. She turned to Ryan, and her son was right there with her, before he forgot who he was. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Several phones had lowered, their owners suddenly conscious of their own reflections in the ballroom's massive windows. Ryan stood transfixed, watching Michelle command the room with the same quiet authority his mother had possessed. "The dress isn't just a piece of clothing," Michelle continued. "It's a reminder of what wealth and influence should mean." Catherine Davis understood that. She wrote about it extensively in her journals, about the responsibility that comes with privilege, about the obligation to lift others up rather than push them down. She reached into a hidden pocket in the dress and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. This was her last journal. "I brought it tonight because I knew it might be needed." She held it out to Ryan, who took it with trembling hands. "Page 42, Mr. Davis. Would you like to read what your mother wrote about you?" The room held its breath. Thomas Chin's face had gone pale, recognizing that the dynamic of power had shifted irrevocably. Ryan opened the journal, found the page, and began to read aloud. Today, Ryan helped Marco, one of our shelter kids, build his first website. My son's eyes lit up when Marco finally understood the code, when everything clicked into place. This is what wealth is for, not to build walls between people, but to build bridges. Ryan understands this now, in his heart. I pray he never forgets. Ryan's voice cracked on the last word. Michelle gently took the journal back, turning to face Thomas and Sarah Chun. You came here tonight planning to humiliate Ryan, to expose his company's aggressive takeover practices, to position yourselves as the conscience of Silicon Valley. Instead, let's talk about real change. She gestured to the artwork hanging on the ballroom walls. All expensive pieces selected by decorators from Maximum Impact. What if these walls displayed art from local creators? What if this ballroom hosted workshops for underprivileged youth? What if we stopped treating charity as a tax write-off and started treating it as an investment in humanity? The silence in the room had transformed from tense to thoughtful. A young startup founder in the back raised her hand tentatively. My company has been working on an AI platform for art education. We've been looking for a partner. Another voice chimed in. We have vacant office space in our building downtown. It could be converted into studios. Thomas Chin watched his carefully orchestrated power play crumble as the room's energy shifted. People were clustering around Michelle and Ryan, offering resources, suggesting collaborations, eager to be part of something genuine. This is meaningless sentiment. Thomas tried one last time. Business is business. No. Ryan finally spoke, his mother's journal still warm in his hands. Business is what we choose to make it. My mother understood that. Michelle reminded me of it. And now, he looked around the room, seeing it through new eyes. Now we have a chance to prove it. Michelle stepped back, ready to fade into the background again, but Ryan caught her hand. Stay, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You're not the help anymore. You're the curator of the Catherine Davis Gallery for Arts and Technology. If you want to be. The dress seemed to glow under the chandelier lights as Michelle stood straighter, accepting both the position and the responsibility it represented. She had come to the gala expecting confrontation, perhaps even hoping for it. Instead, she had sparked a transformation, not just in Ryan, but in the very atmosphere of power and privilege that had defined these gatherings for so long. Thomas and Sarah Chun retreated to the edges of the crowd, their influence diminished not by scandal or bankruptcy revelations, but by something far more powerful, authentic change. The phones had come up again, but now they were recording commitments, exchanging contact information, documenting the beginning of something new. And in the midst of it all, Catherine Davis's dress continued to catch the light, a symbol of everything that had been lost and everything that could still be found. As the energy in the ballroom shifted from confrontation to collaboration, Ryan guided Michelle toward his mother's favorite spot, a quiet corner with a view of both the city lights and the room itself. The space still held traces of Catherine Davis's influence, as where she used to observe her charity events, watching connections form and possibilities unfold. You read all of her journals? Ryan asked, his voice low and uncertain. The question carried the weight of 15 years of avoided grief. Michelle nodded, smoothing the burgundy dress with careful hands. 23 notebooks. She wrote almost every day. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The last entry was about you. She was worried you were losing your way in the tech world, but she never lost faith that you'd find your path back. Ryan stared out at the Los Angeles skyline, seeing not the gleaming towers, but remembering smaller moments. His mother teaching him to code on their old desktop computer, insisting he explain the concepts to shelter kids to ensure he truly understood them himself. I told myself I was being practical, he said. That dissolving her foundation was just good business. You were scared, Michelle said simply. It wasn't an accusation, just the truth. I recognized it because I've been scared too. Every day I paint in that service corridor, knowing someone might catch me. Every time I walk past the art I create, watching the wealthy guests ignore it completely. Ryan turned to look at her, really look at her, seeing beyond the dress to the person wearing it. Show me, he said suddenly. Show me your art. Right now. Michelle hesitated. The gala can wait. Ryan was already moving, his long strides purposeful. Michelle followed him through the service doors, away from the chandelier lights and into the plain, fluorescent-lit corridor where staff usually hurried through their duties unseen. They stopped in front of a large piece mounted on the wall, broken mirrors arranged in a complex pattern, reflecting fractured light onto salvaged circuit boards and discarded computer parts. Looking at it now, Ryan saw what he'd been missing: the perfect marriage of technology and art, of destruction and creation. "I use things people throw away," Michelle explained, her voice gaining confidence as she discussed her work. "The mirrors came from your renovation last year. The circuits are from old DataSphere servers." She touched one of the mirror fragments gently. "Everything reflects everything else. You can't look at one piece without seeing how it connects to all the others." Ryan saw his own reflection scattered across the piece, fragmented and reassembled. In some segments, he looked like his father, all sharp angles and ambition. In others, he caught glimpses of his mother's gentler features. "How long have you been creating these?" 3 years, since I started working here." Michelle watched him examine the work. "Your mother wrote about art like this, pieces that force people to see themselves differently. She believed that true change starts with reflection." The fluorescent lights hummed above them, a stark contrast to the elegant lighting of the ballroom. Yet here, in this back corridor, Ryan felt more real than he had in years. "I want to see more," he said. "All of it." Michelle led him further down the corridor, past storage rooms and service entrances. Each turn revealed another piece: a sculpture made from discarded packaging materials, a mural created with coffee grounds and tea stains, a hanging installation of broken glass and copper wire that caught and transformed the harsh overhead lighting. "The other staff help me collect materials," Michelle explained. "They understand what it means to create beauty from what others discard." She stopped in front of her latest piece, still unfinished. "I was working on this when I found your mother's dress." The piece was different from the others, darker, more challenging. It incorporated shredded documents. Ryan recognized DataSphere letterhead, twisted into intricate patterns that seemed to spell out words when viewed from certain angles. Looking closer, he could make out phrases: quarterly profits, hostile takeover, human resources optimization. "Corporate language," Michelle said quietly. "The words we use to distance ourselves from the human cost of our decisions." Ryan touched one of the shredded papers, remembering the layoff notices he'd signed just last month. "You've been watching all this time." "Everyone watches, Mr. Davis. We just see different things." Michelle straightened her shoulders, Catherine's dress catching the fluorescent light differently than it had under the chandeliers. Less glamorous, more real. "Your mother watched too." She saw how wealth could blind people to what really matters. From the distant ballroom, they could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, the surface sounds of power and influence. But here in the service corridor, surrounded by art made from the detritus of wealth, those sounds seemed hollow. "Help me," Ryan said suddenly. "Not just with the gallery. Help me see what I've been missing." He gestured to the artworks around them. "This is what my mother was trying to teach me. That everything connects, that what we throw away says as much about us as what we keep." Michelle studied him for a long moment, seeing perhaps both the man he'd become and the boy he'd been. "Your mother's gallery," she said finally, "should be more than just a display space. It should be a workshop, a classroom, a place where people from different worlds can create together. Like the coding classes I used to teach." Ryan nodded, memories surfacing. "But bigger, more integrated." He turned in a slow circle, taking in all of Michelle's hidden works. "We could start with your pieces. Show people that beauty and meaning can come from anywhere, that nothing and no one is truly disposable." "That would be a start," Michelle agreed. "But real change takes more," Ryan finished. "I know." He looked down at his custom suit, thinking of the burgundy dress Michelle wore, of all the ways privilege could be either a wall or a bridge. "I'm ready to do the work. Ready to really see." The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting shifting shadows across Michelle's art. In those shadows, Ryan could almost see his mother nodding in approval, could almost hear her voice. "Finally, my son. Finally." Back in the mansion's main hall, Away from both the gala's glamour and the service corridor's stark reality, Ryan unlocked a door he hadn't opened in 15 years. The key had been in his desk drawer all this time, untouched but never forgotten. His mother's private study lay beyond, preserved like a time capsule. "I should have shown you this first," he said to Michelle, flicking on the lights. The room illuminated gradually, revealing walls covered in children's artwork, photographs of community events, and preliminary sketches for what would have been Catherine Davis's greatest project, an integrated arts and technology campus in the heart of the city's poorest district. Michelle moved through the space reverently, the burgundy dress brushing against dust-covered furniture. "These are all documented in her journals," she said, stopping before a large cork board filled with photographs. But seeing them in person, Ryan approached a particular photograph, removing it carefully from the wall. It showed a teenage version of himself sitting at a computer with a young girl, both of them laughing as they worked on what appeared to be a simple coding project. "Maria Rodriguez," he said quietly. She was 12, wanted to build websites for animal shelters to help get pets adopted. "She succeeded," Michelle said, surprising him. "I looked her up after reading about her in your mother's journal. She runs a tech nonprofit now, developing platforms for animal welfare organizations. She tried to contact you several times over the years." The revelation hit Ryan hard. He'd had his assistant screen all communications, blocking anything that didn't relate directly to business. How many other connections had he vered? How many bridges had he burned? Moving to his mother's desk, Ryan ran his fingers along the worn wood. The surface still held ghost impressions of her last notes and drawings. He pulled open the top drawer and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "The campus plans," he explained, spreading the blueprints across the desk. "Mother spent years developing this concept. An educational space where technology and art could coexist, where coding classes would be held next to painting workshops, where virtual reality could be used to create immersive art installations." Michelle studied the plans, her artist's eye catching details others might miss. "These spaces are designed to force interaction," she noted. "No traditional classroom layouts. Everything flows together." Breaking down barriers was her specialty, Ryan said with a sad smile. She used to say that the biggest lie in Silicon Valley was that technology and humanity were somehow separate things. He traced the outline of what would have been the main entrance. "The land is still there. I bought it through a shell company years ago, telling myself I was saving it for future development." "You were saving it for this moment," Michelle said softly. She reached into a hidden pocket of the dress and withdrew another journal, one Ryan hadn't seen before. "I found this behind the drawer of her desk last week. It's different from the others." Ryan took the journal with trembling hands. Unlike his mother's other notebooks, this one was addressed specifically to him. The first page read, "For Ryan, when he's ready to remember who he is." As he read, his mother's voice seemed to fill the room. "My dearest son, if you're reading this, then something has finally awakened in you the understanding I've always known you possess. You're not just your father's son, driven by profit and power. You're my son too, and you carry within you the same capacity for vision and compassion that I hope has marked my life's work. The campus plans aren't just blueprints, they're a roadmap to integration, not just of art and technology, but of people, of classes, of ideas. Silicon Valley builds walls with data. We must build bridges with understanding. I've watched you excel in the tech world, seen you master the language of algorithms and market share. But I've also seen you lose fluency in the language of humanity. Remember when you taught coding? Remember how you lit up when a student finally grasped a concept? That light is still in you, Ryan. It's time to let it shine again. There's a safe behind my favorite Monet print. The combination is the date you first taught Maria Rodriguez to code. Inside you'll find everything you need to restart the foundation, updated for the modern age. I've left instructions, connections, even a list of potential collaborators who share our vision. But most importantly, I've left you a choice. You can continue on your current path, accumulating wealth and power until they become a cage. Or you can choose to use your success as a tool for the change we once dreamed about together. The choice must be yours. But know this, I have never stopped believing in the boy who saw technology as a way to help others, who understood that true innovation means lifting people up, not pushing them down. With eternal love and faith, Mom. Ryan looked up from the journal to find Michelle watching him, her eyes bright with understanding. Without a word, he moved to the Monet print, lifting it carefully from the wall to reveal the safe behind it. His fingers shook slightly as he input the date, 06142008. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside lay another manila envelope, thicker than the first, along with a USB drive and a smaller, sealed envelope with "For my successor," written in Catherine's elegant hand. Ryan realized with sudden clarity that his mother had known. Somehow she had known that he would need more than just his own awakening. He would need someone who understood both worlds, someone who could help bridge the gap between his tech empire and his mother's vision of integrated humanity. He turned to Michelle, holding out the sealed envelope. "I think this is for you." Michelle's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope marked "For my successor." The paper inside held the same elegant handwriting as the journals, but this note was different. It was a blueprint for the future, written by a woman who had somehow seen it coming. "Dear artist," it began, "if you're reading this, you've already shown the courage to challenge the walls between worlds. You're wearing my dress. Yes, I knew someone would find it, would understand its significance. The dress was my armor in board meetings, my connection to humanity during charity galas, and now it's yours. But it's not just a dress, is it? It's a statement about who gets to occupy which spaces and why." Ryan watched Michelle read, seeing emotions play across her face. He turned to the USB drive, inserting it into his mother's old laptop that still sat on her desk. The screen illuminated with folders of documents, detailed proposals, contact lists, financial projections updated until just days before Catherine's death. "She never stopped planning," Ryan said quietly. "Even when she knew she was dying, she kept working on this." Michelle looked up from the letter. "She wrote that you would need someone who understands both sides, the creative and the technical, the service halls and the ballrooms." She carefully refolded the letter. She left instructions for transforming not just the gallery space, but the entire East Wing into an integrated arts and technology incubator. Ryan nodded, scrolling through his mother's files. These proposals, they're not just about art education. She wanted to create a complete ecosystem. Coding workshops taught alongside sculpture classes, VR developers working with traditional painters, AI specialists collaborating with street artists. "The question is," Michelle said carefully, "are you really ready to commit to this? Not just the gallery, but everything it represents? Because your mother's letter is very clear. This can't be a charitable side project. It has to be a complete transformation of how Datasphere operates." Ryan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. In the distance, he could see the tech corridor where Datasphere's main offices dominated the skyline. "You know what my first app was?" he asked suddenly. "Before Datasphere, before all the success, I created a simple program that helped homeless shelters coordinate their resources. Mother encouraged me to develop it, to make it better, more comprehensive. What happened to it? I sold it, took the money, and built what investors wanted instead." He turned back to face Michelle. "But the code is still mine. The foundation of Datasphere was built on that original idea, connecting resources to needs." He moved back to the laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard as he accessed his company's secure servers. "Look at this." Michelle came to stand beside him, looking at the screen. The original shelter coordination program was there, buried under years of corporate developments, but still functional. "You kept it." "I tell myself it was for documentation purposes, but..." He gestured to the program's interface, simpler than modern apps, but somehow more honest in its purpose. "This is who I was, who I could be again." Making a decision, Ryan pulled out his phone and dialed. "Sarah, I need you to call an emergency board meeting." "Yes, I know what time it is." "No, it can't wait until morning." He put the phone on speaker and placed it on the desk. "Ryan, half the board is at the gala." Sarah Chin's voice came through, still tight with tension from earlier. "Whatever this is about the future of Datasphere," Ryan interrupted. "I'm initiating a restructuring, effective immediately. Third, Y% of our resources will be redirected to a new division, the Catherine Davis Initiative for Integrated Innovation. There was a stunned silence on the line. Ryan, Sarah said carefully, the shareholders will understand that this is not just about corporate responsibility, Ryan continued. This is about revolution. We're going to remake what a tech company can be. He looked at Michelle, drawing strength from her presence. The official announcement goes out tomorrow, but I want the board to hear it first. We're not just opening a gallery. We're creating a new model for how technology and humanity can evolve together. You'll face resistance, Michelle said after he hung up. Not everyone will understand. Ryan picked up his mother's journal again, feeling its weight. Then we'll make them understand. Starting tonight. He offered his arm to Michelle. Shall we return to the gala? I believe I have a new vision to share with our guests. Michelle straightened, the burgundy dress catching the light. Not your vision, she corrected gently. Our vision. Catherine's legacy and Datasphere's future merged into something new. Together, they walked to the study door, but Ryan paused before opening it. The shelter coordination program, it needs updating. Modern interfaces, better integration capabilities. Would you consider designing the user experience? Michelle smiled. Merging functionality with accessibility? Creating something beautiful that actually helps people. She touched the dress thoughtfully. I think that's exactly what your mother had in mind. Ryan opened the door, but instead of turning toward the ballroom, he led them toward the east wing. Let's see the gallery space first. Really see it. Before we go back and make promises, I want to stand in that space with you and imagine what it could become. As they walked through the darkened halls of the mansion, their footsteps echoing on marble floors, both could feel the weight of Catherine Davis's legacy guiding them forward. The decisions made tonight would reshape not just their lives, but the lives of countless others who would find their way to this space, this intersection of art and technology, of wealth and purpose. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in 15 years, it felt full of genuine possibility. 6 months after the gala, the Catherine Davis Center for Integrated Innovation hummed with activity. The east wing of the mansion, once a silent monument to lost potential, now buzzed with the energy of creation. The transformation had exceeded even Catherine's detailed plans. Michelle stood in what had been the formal dining room, now converted into a mixed-media workspace. Students from local community colleges worked alongside tech entrepreneurs, their collaborative projects spreading across large work tables. On one wall, a teenager from Michelle's old neighborhood was coding a digital interface for his friend's sculpture. The piece would respond to viewers' movements, changing colors and patterns based on proximity. Ms. Brown, a young woman approached, tablet in hand. The VR installation for next week's showcase needs your final approval. Maria Rodriguez, the same Maria from Ryan's old coding class, had joined the center as a technical advisor. Her animal shelter coordination system was now being integrated into Datasphere's core applications. What do you think? Michelle asked, pulling up the installation specs. She'd insisted on maintaining her direct, hands-on approach to management, even as her role had expanded far beyond initial expectations. It's powerful, Maria said, swiping through the renderings. The way it merges traditional painting techniques with digital manipulation, it's exactly what Catherine would have wanted. She paused, smiling. Ryan's been testing it every chance he gets. The mention of Ryan made Michelle glance at her watch. He would be finishing his presentation to Dad. Asphere shareholders right now. The quarterly update on the Catherine Davis Initiative's impact. The numbers spoke for themselves. Community engagement up 300%, tech literacy rates improving in partner neighborhoods, and most surprisingly to the skeptics, Datasphere's stock value rising as the company's integrated approach attracted new partners and opportunities. Michelle, Ryan's voice carried across the workspace. He strode in, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder, looking more energized than he had in years. You need to see this. He pulled up a holographic display, another innovation from their student developers. The shareholders didn't just approve our expansion plans. They're doubling the initiative's budget. The news rippled through the room. Students looked up from their projects, staff members gathered closer. Ryan continued, his eyes bright with excitement. But that's not the best part. Show them, Maria. Maria tapped her tablet, and the holographic display shifted to show a familiar interface. Ryan's original shelter coordination program, but completely reimagined. We've integrated Michelle's user experience design with advanced AI capabilities, Maria explained. It's not just about coordinating resources anymore. The system learns, adapts, identifies patterns of need, and suggests proactive solutions. And, Ryan added, every line of code, every design element, was created right here by our students and residents. He gestured to the room around them. This is what Mother meant by integrated innovation. Michelle watched the display, remembering the hidden artwork in the service corridor that had started it all. Those pieces now hung proudly in the center's main gallery, alongside works by emerging artists from across the city. The barriers between service areas and public spaces had quite literally been torn down during renovation, creating an environment where everyone's contributions were equally visible and valued. There's more, Ryan said quietly, leading Michelle to the window. Outside, construction crews were breaking ground on what would become the Catherine Davis campus for creative technology. The empty lot that Ryan had held on to for so long was finally fulfilling its intended purpose. The first classes start next fall, he continued. Full scholarships for 50 students from underserved communities. But here's what I wanted to show you. He handed her a tablet displaying profiles of the teaching staff. Look who applied to lead the integrated arts program. Michelle scrolled through the names, stopping at a familiar one. Thomas Chin's daughter, Alexandra, a brilliant artist who'd been fighting against her parents' tech-only mindset for years. Does Thomas know? He does now, Ryan smiled. She presented her curriculum proposal at the shareholders' meeting. You should have seen his face when she talked about using AI to analyze and recreate classical painting techniques. It was like watching someone's whole worldview shift in real time. The impact of their work was spreading beyond the center's walls. Other tech companies had started launching their own integration initiatives. Art schools were incorporating coding classes. Coding boot camps were adding creative components. The walls between disciplines were crumbling. Michelle touched the fabric of her dress. Not Catherine's burgundy gown, but a new piece she designed herself, incorporating conductive threads that could interact with the center's various digital installations. She kept Catherine's dress carefully preserved, but its purpose had been served. It had been a key to unlock something greater. Ryan, she said, watching the students' work, I've been thinking about Catherine's last journal entry, the one about seeing technology as a bridge rather than a wall. She pointed to a group of students helping each other debug a particularly complex piece of interactive art. Look at them. They don't see boundary. Between art and tech, between wealth and creativity. They just see possibilities. Ryan nodded, understanding. Mother would have loved this, but she would have also asked, what's next? He pulled up another set of plans on the holographic display. The satellite centers we discussed? I think it's time, starting with your old neighborhood in Riverside. Michelle studied the plans, already seeing the potential. We'll need to adapt the model, make it specific to each community's needs. That's why I want you to lead the expansion, Ryan said. You understand both the vision and the reality. You can see what others miss. He gestured to the room full of activity. All of this started because you dared to make yourself visible. Now it's time to help others do the same. The center continued to buzz around them, each project, each collaboration, each small breakthrough adding to the growing wave of change. The impact wasn't just in measurable metrics. It was in the way people moved through the space, the way they interacted, the way they saw themselves and each other. Catherine Davis's legacy had evolved into something even she might not have imagined, but its core remained true. The belief that when barriers fall, humanity rises. And in the heart of Silicon Valley, a new model of innovation was proving that technology's greatest power lies not in its ability to disrupt, but in its capacity to connect. On the evening of Michelle's first major gallery opening at the Catherine Davis Center, Ryan was helping her arrange the final pieces when his phone buzzed with an alert. The mansion's AI security system had detected movement in his mother's old study, a room that remained largely untouched since the night of the gala. That's strange, Ryan said, checking the feed. The biometric locks haven't been breached. Michelle paused in adjusting a light installation. Could it be the maintenance crew? No one has clearance except us. Ryan was already moving toward the study, Michelle following close behind. As they approached, they could see lights spilling from beneath the door, though they were certain they'd left it dark. Ryan placed his hand on the biometric scanner, and the door clicked open. Inside, Catherine Davis's desk lamp was on, illuminating a small wooden box that neither of them had ever seen before. It sat precisely in the center of the desk, as if carefully placed. "That's not possible," Ryan breathed. "I know every item in this room." Michelle moved closer to the box, her artist's eye noting its craftsmanship. "Look at the inlay pattern." She pointed to a series of intricate designs carved into the wood. "These aren't just decorative. They're code." Ryan leaned in, his tech background kicking in. Binary sequences, but modified. Mother used to experiment with visual representations of code. His hands trembled slightly as he recognized the pattern. "This is from my first program, the shelter coordination system." "But how?" Michelle carefully opened the box. Inside lay a single USB drive and a letter dated 1 week before Catherine's death. The letter was addressed to both Ryan and Michelle. "To my son and the artist who will help him remember," Michelle read aloud, her voice catching. "If you're reading this, then everything has happened as I hoped. The dress has been found, the center has been established, and most importantly, you've found each other." Ryan sank into his mother's chair, stunned. "She couldn't have known." Michelle continued reading. "Ryan, you'll wonder how I could have known about Michelle. The truth is both simpler and more extraordinary than you might imagine. 20 years ago, I funded a small community art program in Riverside. Among the students was a 12-year-old girl whose work caught my attention, not just for its creativity, but for the way she incorporated discarded technology into her pieces." Ryan looked up sharply. "You." Michelle's hands shook his S. He read on. "I watched this young artist grow, provided anonymous scholarships, ensured her talent wouldn't be wasted. When she applied for the housekeeping position at the mansion, I made sure her application reached the top of the pile. Not because I wanted her to clean, but because I knew she would see what others missed, the possibility of beauty in forgotten spaces." "The service corridor artwork," Ryan whispered. "You were never just the housekeeper." "Michelle," she continued reading, her voice barely steady, "I knew you would find my dress, just as I knew you would understand its significance. Your art in the service corridors, each piece a perfect blend of the discarded and the divine, showed me that you were ready to help my son remember who he was meant to be." Ryan stood and moved to the window, overwhelmed. All this time, she was orchestrating everything, even after she was gone. "There's more," Michelle said, turning to the final page. "The USB drive contains one last gift. The original source code for Ryan's shelter program, merged with prototype designs for an integrated arts and technology platform that I worked on in secret. Together, they form the foundation for something I never had time to build, a true bridge between worlds." "But that's not possible," Ryan turned back. "The integration work we've been doing, the new platforms." "By now," Michelle read, "you've likely already begun creating something similar. Great minds, especially when guided by the same star, often find the same path. The code on this drive isn't meant to replace what you've built, but to show you both that your vision, your shared vision, was always meant to be." Ryan took the USB drive with reverent hands. She saw it all. The center, the integration of art and tech, even us working together. "Not quite everything," Michelle said, reaching the letter's final lines. "What you've built has already exceeded my hopes. But the real twist, my dears, isn't that I planned this reunion. It's that you would have found each other anyway. Some connections are simply meant to be. The dress, the journals, this box, they were just my way of giving fate a little push." Ryan plugged the USB drive into his mother's laptop. As the files loaded, they could see that Catherine's platform designs mirrored their current work in uncanny ways, but with subtle differences, new possibilities they hadn't yet explored. "One last gift," Michelle whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "She's showing us the next step." The final file opened automatically, displaying a single image, a sketch of the mansion's east wing transformed into something very much like their current center, but with one significant difference. In Catherine's vision, The transformation didn't stop at the property line. The entire neighborhood was integrated into the design, creating a flowing ecosystem of innovation and creativity. "Look at the date on this sketch," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. "One day before she died. This was her last work." Michelle touched the screen gently. "No," she said, "this is her last work." She gestured around them, at the center beyond the study's walls, at the students and artists and technologists working together, at the barriers that had crumbled between worlds. "We're her last work. All of this, and it's still not finished." Ryan looked at Michelle, seeing her anew, not as his housekeeper, not as his partner in the center, but as someone his mother had chosen long ago, believing in the power of connections that transcended social boundaries and time itself. "She gave us a mystery to solve," he said finally, "but the real revelation wasn't in solving it. It was in discovering that we were the mystery all along." Outside the study, they could hear the excited voices of students and artists arriving for the gallery opening. The Catherine Davis Center for Integrated Innovation was about to outcase its first year of work to the world. But here in the quiet of the study, surrounded by the echoes of a vision that had been unfolding for decades, Ryan and Michelle understood that they were part of something far larger than themselves. The dress that had started it all hung in a place of honor in the center's entrance, but its true magic had never been in the fabric. It had been in the connections it revealed, connections that Catherine Davis had seen long ago, when she watched a young boy teach coding to shelter kids, and a young girl turn discarded technology into art. Some twists, it seemed, were written in the stars long before we recognized them. And sometimes, the greatest revelation is discovering that the path we thought we were forging had been lovingly laid before us, waiting for the moment we were ready to walk it.